Hey, business warriors, this is Professor E again with another video learning review in our series here. We're now hitting VLR-3. We're going to talk a little bit about the business and the global markets. Let's get started. When we start talking about the global markets, so we're going to look at, what is the plan for those out there that want to maybe get into the global markets as a career. So what are some of the key factors that you may want to consider as far as your education goes when you start to move forward and thinking, hey, I want to get into international business and things like that? What are we looking for? Well, obviously, you're going to want to probably study a foreign language. Many students out there probably already have a foreign language in their background. Sometimes English is their second language, so they're really learning stuff here in the United States with the intent that they're going to take a lot of the knowledge they gain here and then go back to their country and then maybe work with the United States as some sort of international business. That's great. You're going to have to learn about a foreign culture, obviously, especially if you want to go into a certain region of the world and learn about that culture, learn about how they do business there, things like that. And then you're going to have to take some global business courses. Business 280 is probably the best one to take. International business. It really jumps into the details of kind of what we're going to talk about today. This is like an overview of what you would probably see when you dive into Business 280 International Business. Just getting started, we start looking at businesses in the global market. We're looking at like 95% of the companies doing business globally believe it's important for employees to have some sort of international business. So whether you're coming from another country, coming here taking some courses, or if you're here taking courses with the intent to go overseas, you're going to want to get some sort of international business experience. How do you do that? Maybe you do it through an internship program or something like that. It's just there's different ways you can network your way into areas where you can get that experience. One of the cool things is an example that we have here is U.S. organizations like UPS, the NFL. I'm a big NFL fan. I love my football, and the NBA is actually also starting to try to expand overseas. We're seeing the NFL right now trying to do a couple games over in England and Wimbledon. They've done some games in Mexico City, which actually ended up being a fiasco because a couple years ago they tried to get, I think, the Patriots or something like that down in Mexico City, and the field was so bad that the players were like, absolutely not, we're doing this. So it's a slow growing process. Personally, I don't think it's a great process. I think we just should keep it locally. Sometimes when you try to expand too far, too fast into other markets like that, and you don't really have a good business plan, which we've talked about, it doesn't really work out. So, but again, they're giving it a shot. They want to see if they can make that work, and that's kind of how the way the world works. When we start breaking it down, we get into importing and exporting. Again, this is an international business, 280 kind of stuff. You're really going to get into it. But when we start talking about importing and exporting, what are we talking about? Well, importing is a basic term. We're just looking at buying products from another country. So we're bringing in their products into our country. Therefore, exporting is what? Well, obviously, we're selling and we're sending products overseas to other countries. So importing and exporting. The U.S. is the largest importing and the second largest exporting nation in the world. Obviously, we're the largest importers. We import everything, right? So we're always looking for stuff coming from other countries, and then we're the second largest exporters. That's very interesting. Trading with other nations, they start looking at countries with abundant natural resources out there, such as say Venezuela, which we talked about in the last VLR. What are they like, right? They're socialism. And Russia, we're looking at communism. They need the technology resources from other countries, say Japan or even the U.S. They don't have that internally within their country. So they start looking to do trades with each other instead of just buying those technologies from others. Maybe they have oil or they have something that they can give in return for those technologies. So a lot of trading going on within the other nations and stuff like that. Global trade allows countries to produce what they make best, and then they're going to buy what they don't, right? What they need. So and that kind of creates more of a free trade idea where we're looking at the movement of goods and services among nations without political or economic barriers. Okay, so we want to try to create the free trade agreements, which we have within the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We have it's actually the USMCA trade agreement between the two countries, the three countries there. Why is free trade so important? Well, we look at the benefits of free trade within the world, and it's kind of interesting if you really think about it. It's kind of a fact slide here, but global trade has led the world in a new direction because the literacy rates worldwide are really impacted by how we increase our trade amongst other countries and stuff like that. You can see here we look at it was literacy rate in 1950 was 56% in weaker countries or third world nations and stuff like that, and now it's up to 84% just a couple years ago. And the life expectancy, again, we're bringing in new technologies, we're bringing in new resources to other countries and helping them out. And you can see just by doing that in less developed areas, the average age 1950 was just under 41 years old. You're dying at 41, and now they're living to almost 70 years old. So very interesting how trade in the world can actually benefit people in other less developed countries. We start talking about going global in the small business realm, and we're looking at small businesses may be probably the key to growth going forward. I haven't really shown a lot of the statistics yet, but when we get into the U.S. markets, the U.S. markets make up just about, I think small businesses make up almost 70% of our U.S. market. It's very interesting that the small business owner is really kind of the backbone of our country. So, but again, the small businesses are going to be very key as we go forward with the global growth. We look at probably the small businesses make up almost half of the private sector. That's interesting. 30% of small businesses export. Remember, we said stuff overseas, exporting out. 30% is done by small businesses, okay? And probably over the next decade, they're almost expecting that to be 50%. Why? Well, because of technology, right? Because again, I've mentioned this before in previous VLRs, but as the technology increases, and I think if you recall, I showed you that slide of the farmer, the agricultural industry, and then we got into manufacturing because of technology, and then we get into the services industry because of technology, and so on and so forth. The increase of our technology advancements that we have is just going to increase more opportunities, and those opportunities are going to be taken by whom? Entrepreneurs, small business owners, things like that. I mean, imagine one day you have an app. You hit the app and it just says, hey, send a drone, and then that drone comes over and picks it up and then delivers something into a foreign country, or the drone takes it to a major airport and it gets loaded. It's kind of crazy, the ideas that we have out there right now. Where does the U.S. invest? We start looking at leading destinations for foreign investments. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. The U.S. is obviously number one. People are putting money into the U.S. and stuff like that. This is 2008 and just a couple years ago. So we're looking at the growth rate here. What's really interesting about it is how Russia and India weren't even on the map probably back in 2008. Now look at them; they're almost surpassed UK and Germany already just in 10 years. Well, about 12 years now. But you get the idea is that India is coming on strong. So is Russia. That's very interesting. Okay, so lots of money out there for different types of investments. We look at who does the U.S. owe. This is great, right? So, countries that own the most U.S. debt, right? We have a lot of debt out there. So who owns that debt? Well, guess what? China owns most of that debt. That kind of makes sense, right? And then you see all the other ones that owe us. Bottom line is we pretty much owe everybody, right? That's kind of how we operate. We just create as much debt as possible and everybody buys our debt. It's fantastic, right? Starting to getting involved in exporting. Again, what's exporting is sending our products out, right? Exporting provides a great boost to the U.S. economy. How so? Well, it is estimated that for every $1 billion that we export out of the U.S., it generates over 20,000 U.S. jobs. Okay, so this is why we always want to be what we said we're the second leading exporter in the world, right? So we want to be exporting as much as we can because it creates jobs here in the U.S. And if you remember the last VLR, unemployment's up right now, so we really want to kind of keep these trade agreements going. We want to keep these trade relationships going so we can start manufacturing and getting things going again. How do we measure that global trade? Well, there are three ways to do it. First of all, we get into the balance of trade. We really start looking at the total value of the nation's exports compared to what our imports are. Okay, so how much product are we sending out versus how much product are we bringing in? Okay, in order to have a trade surplus, then what we're looking at is when the value of the country's exports, what we send out, is actually more than what we import. Okay, so trade surplus, the countries, we're looking at more going out than there's coming in. A trade deficit, though, means that we are less exports than we are imports. So we're importing more than we are exporting. So if you can imagine, which one are we? Well, we're a trade deficit, right? Because we import way more than we actually export. So I don't think we've ever had a trade surplus. I can't recall any time of having a trade surplus. It's always been us importing way more than we export. Then we kind of flip the script a little bit and we get into balance of payments. So what's the idea behind the balance of payments? Well, we're looking at the amount of money now that's coming into the country from the export. So if we export a product, what do we get in return? Well, we're getting money in return, right? And then if we import something, that means we're giving our money out, okay? Because we're buying something, okay? So the idea is the balance of payments, all right? So the goal is to have a favorable balance of trade, or I'm sorry, favor balance of payments, okay? Which would probably be what then? Well, ideally, we would want to have more money flowing into the country than flowing out of the country, okay? But we're the United States, right? So what do you think ours is? Well, ours is an unfavorable balance, right? Because if we are importing more than we're exporting, which I just described, that means we are exporting more money than we're importing. So we have an unfavorable balance when more money is flowing out of the country. It kind of leads us into then trade practices, right? So some more terms for you guys to understand, but we're getting into dumping, all right? We're start looking at there are some countries out there who try to take advantage of the United States and other countries by just dumping their products into their country, selling their products to a foreign country for a way lower price than actually being charged by that country, okay? So they undercut the actual country that they're going into, okay? Dumping is prohibited because it would damage an economy if, say, a great example is China has a lower GDP than us. They have lower cost of labor, so therefore their products are cheaper. We all understand that. I'm sure at some point in time we've skipped the middleman, the retailers, and just bought something directly from China because it took 4 weeks to get to us, right? But we only had to pay, 80% of the cost. So we saved a lot of money. We just had to wait for it to come. Imagine that concept because China has a lower labor rate. If they could just dump everything into other countries to make their money, right? So we want to prohibit that because we want to kind of keep the economies going and keep them kind of fair. China, Brazil, and Russia have been penalized in the past for dumping steel into the U.S. at a very low price. Okay, so we have to watch that kind of stuff. Leads into a couple key strategies when reaching the global markets. There's a few ways that you can do this as a business. Okay. It goes from, what's the most robust way to do it to the least and easiest way to do it. And the idea is that you can always license a product. I'm going to discuss that in a second, okay? But the idea is that basically, if I have a product that I've come up with, maybe I have a patent on that product, I can then, instead of me trying to sell it and figure out the target market and all that stuff, maybe I just give it to a large conglomerate and I do licensing to them. So they slap their brand logo on it and they do all the work. I just keep getting royalty fees from it and stuff like that. That's kind of the idea behind it. Exporting, I could start looking at how I can get on to sending things out to other countries. Franchising, I may want to just, instead of create my own business, I may want to franchise one that's already existing. Contract manufacturing would be something along the lines of, instead of me making the product here in the United States at a higher cost, and I want to minimize those costs. If you remember that first slide where I had revenues and expenses and I like to hug my profits, and I said, how do we make that square a rectangle? Well, one of them might be, how do I reduce my expenses? Well, I may be able to go overseas and create a contract with a Chinese manufacturer, right? So they'll do it for lower labor cost, and then it creates a lower cost to my product, and then I can sell it at a higher margin here in the United States. So that's one way to do it. And then we'll talk a little bit about joint ventures and strategic alliances and how they intertwine with each other with two conglomerates coming together to work together. And then we'll talk real briefly about foreign direct investment. So again, just breaking it down, we're looking at licensing. Again, when a firm, the licensor, okay, provides the right to manufacture its product or use its trademark, right, to a foreign company possibly, okay, and for a royalty fee. When we get into, unfortunately, we won't have this opportunity, but when I'm in class or on campus, usually before we start the presentation, I'll just do a segment of Shark Tank. And I like to show you guys when an entrepreneur comes in and says, hey, I'm looking for $50,000 for 10% of my company. And then, I like to take you through the process of where the sharks really sharpshoot them. How much does it cost? Do you make it? What are you selling it for? They're trying to determine what the profit margins are. What were your sales for, say, this past year? And the entrepreneur will have to answer these questions. And then the sharks have to make a determination whether or not they really want to invest into this company. One of them is Kevin O'Leary. He's the bald guy. They call him Mr. Wonderful. It's pretty funny because he has done probably over 100 to 200 different licensing agreements. He is a big fan of this licensing product because he likes the idea of going in to a larger conglomerate, having them do all the work, and they just pay you a royalty fee. A royalty fee would be, and this says right here, royalty fee would be something along the lines of, hey, they have my brand, they have my product, they put their own logo on it, they put whatever they want on it, they keep manufacturing my product, okay? And then they keep sending me, say, 10%. Or whatever they make, I get 10% off the top. That's just an example of a royalty fee I could get. You just kind of sit back and wait for the checks to come in, which is what Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank really likes. He likes doing nothing and just having checks come in. Licensing can benefit the firm by gaining revenues it wouldn't have otherwise generated. Again, just checks keep coming in because someone else is doing all the manufacturing and stuff. Spending little or no money to market their products. There is no marketing campaign you have to worry about because they're doing it all. That's why I said they're putting their own logo on it, but it's your product. We get into franchising, okay? So we're looking at, of a contractual agreement whereby someone with a good idea or a business plan or something like that gives the rights to somebody else to run that business, right? So an example might be, I have here Pizza Hut or Domino's, okay? Or McDonald's is a great one. If you wanted to be, Subway's a great one. So if you wanted to start a sandwich shop, right? What would I call it? Maybe I call it a mom and pop sub shop, right? That's actually a great idea. Maybe I do the mom and pop sub shop. What a great idea, right? Mom and pop sub shop. But if I wanted to start the mom and pop sub shop, I'd have to come up with my own business plan. I'd have to come up with who are my suppliers going to be, where's the location going to be, who's my target market, how am I going to reach them? All these things you have to develop in order to kind of get the business off the ground and be successful. But what if I just go instead of starting the mom and pop sub shop, I just go franchise Subway, and I open up a Subway or a Quiznos or something like that. I pay their franchise fee. I get, basically, you're going to get their licensing to run their business under their name. But what they're going to hand you is, their business plan. They're going to say, hey, we've done it all. This is the suppliers we use. This is the way the layout of your restaurant should be. This is the way, in any national campaigns, and I'm sure if you've been out there, if you ever heard the $5, $5 footlong campaign that Subway's done in the past. It's a national campaign, right? They have the dance $5, whatever. The idea is that if I'm the franchise owner of that Subway, I can participate in that national campaign. I don't have to pay them anything. I'm just part of that process, right? So, and there's been Subways I'm sure you may have gone to that they have a sign that says we're not participating in that campaign. That's because that local entrepreneur who's the franchise owner has decided that maybe I can't afford that discount off of the $5. They've done some math going, I may not actually come out ahead on this, so they decide not to be a part of that. But you have that opportunity. You don't have to go through the whole business planning of everything. It's all kind of given to you. So franchising can be a really good thing if you are an entrepreneur who wants to get started but really don't want to kind of start from scratch. And again, a great example, I said McDonald's, right? It says the sun never sets on Mickey D's. Well, that's because they're all around the world, right? So when the sun sets in one place, it's coming up in another place, and Mickey D's is always running, right? More than 31,000 restaurants in over 118 countries. Maintains various menus around the world. I'm going to show you a couple here in a second. But they do have to respond to challenges by funding research and adding healthier options. Again, goods or services that satisfy a need. If the needs have changed within that target market or your customer base, and you're not satisfying those needs, you're not going to be making money. So they have to do their research in order to make sure that they're always honing in on what the customer wants, so we can provide it to them. And here's just some examples. That's a McDonald's, right? So in Malaysia, they call it the Bubur Ayam McD, chicken strips in porridge with onions, gingers, and shallots. That's interesting. In Egypt, it's called the Macarabia, grilled chicken with tahina sauces, lettuce, tomato, and onion on Arabic bread. And then we have in Japan, it's called the teratama. So it's a teriyaki burger topped with an egg. Sounds interesting. We don't have that here. It's pretty interesting. In Germany, if you want a beer with it, you can. They just sell beer right there at the McDonald's. We don't have that here, obviously. And then in Israel, they operate using kosher kitchens, right? So different things that McDonald's has to do worldwide if they want to be in that market. Okay, they have to do that research and make sure that they provide the right things for that market. We get into contract manufacturing. I mentioned this briefly, but we're looking at foreign companies produces a private label good, right, to which the domestic company can then attach its own brand name to it. Okay, so I kind of mentioned that before, in that, you know, if I want to do some sort of contract manufacturing, of course I put right here made in China, allows the company to experiment in maybe a new market without really having to spend a lot of money. You can contract manufacture it, right? I don't have to incur the heavy startup costs, such as building a manufacturing plant. I'll just outsource it to a contract manufacturer and have them produce it for me. That way, if it doesn't work out, you know, it's not as much money as I've lost. So it's again part of the game plan that you put together when you're doing the business plan. Leads us into joint ventures and strategic alliances. So we'll start off first with the joint venture, and basically that's just a partnership between two companies, right? So two companies come together. They realize that they have a very similar market that they can go after. So what they do is they literally join together and then go after that market. They share in the technology. They share in the risks. They'll share in the marketing. They'll share in the management expertise. Everything is shared when you get into the joint. So I can't stress that enough. It's shared. That's the joint venture stuff. Entry into markets where foreign companies are not allowed. That's a good way to do a joint venture. So if a foreign company is trying to get into, say, to the United States, and there's some sort of policies in place that may be hindering them from getting into the United States, they may then reach out to maybe a smaller company that's in the U.S. already, and they'll try to do a joint venture with them so they can share some of that stuff and say, hey, this is our way in. So that's one technique for doing a joint venture. Leads us then into a strategic alliance. So we start looking, remember I told you joint ventures where they share everything. A strategic alliance is a little different animal in that it's still a partnership agreement, okay, between two or more companies, okay? But the idea is that unlike a strategic venture, the strategic alliance does not typically share, okay? What that means is that we're coming together. We'll do this. This is sharing. We're coming together and we're going after the similar markets, but we may be selling one product and you're selling a service attached to that product. That's a great one. So like Apple's selling iPhones, but they may need Verizon services. So that might be more of a strategic alliance. That means that if Apple makes money on their product, okay, that doesn't mean that Verizon makes money at all. Okay, if Verizon makes money on some services for another type of phone, say a Samsung, right? That means Apple doesn't make that money, but they could be together as a strategic alliance so that they can go after the market together, okay? So joint ventures, they share in everything. Strategic alliances, they partner up with the intent that we're going after our profits, you're going after yours, okay? Strategic alliances provide broad access to markets, okay? And again, capital, and they have the technical expertise and things like that. Leads us into FDIs, or foreign direct investments. Again, this is business 280 stuff, guys. This is an overview of it, but you're going to get hot and heavy into this when you get into 280 and really break it down. But the idea here is the buying of permanent property, right, and businesses in a foreign nation. Great example, again, I think I used in a previous VLR, would be IKEA, right? IKEA is headquartered in the Netherlands, but they have a foreign direct investment here in the United States. They actually have a facility here that they've built, okay? Why? Because they realized that from a cost standpoint, it wouldn't be wise to, say, have just a website or a storefront or something like that and have everything constantly being shipped overseas to get here and then get it to the customer, because the customer wants it when? Well, they want it right now, right? So they decided that it would be cost effective to have a foreign direct investment here in the United States in order to meet the customer demands quicker so they can make their profits faster, okay? Leads us into a foreign subsidiary company owned in a foreign country, right, by another called a parent company. Again, IKEA would be a foreign subsidiary here in the U.S. because the headquarters are in the Netherlands. Primary advantage, parent company maintains complete control over its technology and expertise. Some disadvantages, must commit funds and technology within the foreign boundaries. So they got to commit their funds here in the United States as an example. Leads us into some forces that affect the global trade, or environmental forces that we like to call that in business. So what are some of the environmental forces? Well, it's almost the same forces just if you were in the United States, right? We talked about, if you remember the chart, it was kind of an eye chart, but I talked about the economy and competition and social, cultural, and technology, okay? It's the same concept. Even legal and regulatory should have been probably in that previous slide that I showed you in the other VLR, but everything's affecting things around us. Again, if you remember from the previous VLR, I said you cannot control it, but you must do what? Monitor it. Okay, so it's the same concepts with the global aspects of things. Okay, so we still have social, big time social cultural, right? Because now I'm actually going into a foreign country. I better know their culture better than anything else, because everyone's different. I can't go in and start shaking hands when they don't shake hands. I mean, that's a great example, right? I have to go in and understand the culture. How does the politics work there? How does their economy work there? How do they kind of do business there? Otherwise, I'm going to fail miserably. Again, that's part of that pre-business planning aspect of things so that you can go into these foreign countries. Economic, financial, what are the legal and regulatory? They may have different regulatory systems and processes in place in the foreign country that you're not aware of. So once you get there, you go, I didn't know that. We don't do that in the U.S. Well, you have to understand that stuff. And then the physical environment itself, all right, and environmental stuff. Here's some cultural differences. Again, we start looking at, to be involved in those global trades, you must be aware of the cultural differences, right? And here's my example. She's trying to shake hands and she's looking at her like, we don't do that here, okay? So you have to understand the culture so that you can break into the culture and kind of meet the needs quicker. They look at the religion. That's something you definitely do in 280. We break down different religions and how they act and affect economies and governments and stuff like that. Their manners, their value system, many different value systems out there that you have to make sure you don't interfere on, otherwise they'll be disrespected and then you won't be able to be successful in that country. Personal communication, obviously language, right? We already talked about that. If you're going to be an international business person, you're probably going to have to learn the language. Here's some great examples. This is marketing. Lost in translation. Braniff Airlines slogan was "Fly in leather," but it translated in Spanish as "Fly naked." So can you imagine people showing up to that airport, right? My favorite one is the Gerber baby. If you remember Gerber baby foods, they had that cute little baby, from like the 1940s, the same Gerber baby, right? Well, what's interesting about that is the cute baby on African products. Okay, so things that are on African products. People in Africa, whatever they see as the labels, they think that's what's inside the actual container. So imagine that they found out that the labels in African product pictures what's inside the package. So if you see a cute little baby on baby food, they think that's the actual baby inside. So not good research of understanding your culture right there. They probably didn't sell a lot of baby food there. In Italy, Schweppes tonic water was mistaken for Schweppes toilet water. Again, probably didn't make a lot of money there. Okay. Ready to travel abroad? Well, here's some other cultural differences. So in Turkey, it's rude to cross your arms when facing someone. Okay, so here we look at if somebody crosses your arms while they're talking to you, you pick up on natural mnemonics and go, okay, they're not interested or something like that. It's actually considered, disrespectful in Turkey. Let's see. In Middle Eastern countries, you shouldn't eat or shake hands with your left hand because it's considered unclean. Well, we always shake hands with our right hand. Of course, I should put a new one up there. We may never shake hands again, right? Maybe always be an elbow tap from now on. Who knows, right? In India, you should never pat anyone's head. It's where their soul is kept. Interesting. I personally, if anyone taps me on the head, I probably wouldn't be very happy about it anyway. But in India, it's actually part of their culture, okay? I guess that's where their soul is kept. And in Brazil, this is so true. If your meeting starts on, let's say 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll probably start around 3:30 or 4. They never start anything on time. Okay, so you have to do that research because if you know it's a 2 o'clock meeting, they'll probably get there around 3:30 or 4. That's just the way they operate in Brazil, South America in general. Okay, so very funny. Know your culture. Leads us into exchange rates. Okay, so we're starting looking at the value of one nation's currency with relative to other countries. So the dollar is at a certain exchange rate, say to Canadian dollar or British pound or the Chinese yen and all that stuff. Okay, there's different exchange rates there. What's interesting to note about that is the high value of the dollar. So if our value of our dollar is higher than the other currencies, trading for more than the foreign currency, that means the foreign goods are less expensive to us. We kind of get more bang for our buck when we go into a foreign country and buy things. Because if you can imagine, for simplicity, if I go in with $100 into a foreign country and let's say India, I think they have rupees, then that translates into 8,000 rupees, right? And a shirt costs 100 rupees. Well, I can buy a lot of shirts. So that's my point. I get a big bang for my buck because of the exchange rate. That's the idea behind it. And then, of course, if the lower value of the dollar, so if the value of our dollar goes down compared to other currencies, that means they basically have more bang for their buck. If they come into our country, they can then do they can do an exchange rate of their foreign currency to U.S. dollars and then buy a lot of things. Dollars trading for less than foreign currencies. Foreign goods are more expensive. Again, if I go into that same country and my dollar's weak at the time, that means that I'm not getting as much of their foreign currency. I have less buying power for whatever foreign products are in that country. Currencies float in value depending on the supply and demand in the global market. So they're always fluctuating based on what's going on in the global markets. Leads you into the devaluation and counter trading. So devaluing or lowering the value of a nation's currencies relative to others. Fantastic example would be in 2008 when we had the mortgage debacle and real estate problems. I think if you remember the chart where I showed you economic boom and prosperity and then recession, I told you in 2008 it went way down like that. It was like 50% drop in like 3 months or 4 months or something like that. The idea behind that, though, was we were on the verge of kind of an economic collapse. And in order for us to kind of get our way out of it, is that the Fed, I haven't talked about the Fed yet, we'll talk about it in the future, but the Fed decided that let's start printing money as much as we can. So they started cranking out as much money as they could. Well, again, supply and demand. If there's a high supply of something, right? Imagine a lot of US dollars being supplied into the market and the demand stays the same. What changes? Well, price, the value, right? So the value of the dollar was pushed way down. The reason they did that, the devaluation of the dollar, was because then, remember I just explained it, that meant foreign exchange currencies could then come here in exchange for our very devalued dollar, right? And therefore they had more bang for their buck to come into our country and then, buy things up. And it kept our economy going then. So foreigners would come in, exchange their currency for our dollars, and then buy things within our country, and it kept our country afloat. So that was kind of the idea behind it. Counter trading, we use complex forms of bartering, okay, which several countries do. They trade with each other for goods and services. Instead of just money, we can give them technology for their oil or something like that. So it doesn't always have to be about money. It can be counter trading when we start doing more of a complex bartering system. Leads us into now trade protectionism, okay? The use of government regulations, all right, that limit the amount of imports. What's an import again? Things that are coming into the country, okay? Goods that are services coming into the country, okay? So we're going to start putting some sort of protection on those things so that we can still keep the economy, the local economy here in the U.S., we can keep it going, okay? Remember I talked about dumping and China trying to dump steel at a very low price and stuff like that? This is where trade protectionism comes in place, and we can kind of manage that. How do we do that? Well, the first one is tariffs. If you haven't heard of a tariff in the last 2 years, you've been under a rock, okay? Because this has been one of the major headlines with China. We're increasing our tariffs on them. So what is it? Well, we're looking at, this is very important, we're looking at taxes on imports that come in, right? So again, great example will be China. Let's use China because we've increased our taxes on China imports. And the reason is because things are so cheap over there. They have a low cost of living, lower labor costs. They can make products at a lower price than we can in the United States. So let's say if something comes in at $50, but locally here in our economy, that same product is selling for $100, well, then we'll add a tax to it so we can elevate that price of that foreign product so it can compete in the U.S. markets. That's really the gist of it, okay? The idea is that we want to add tax to imports because it's revenue, too, for the United States. Remember we talked about GDP? Remember our GDP kept going up? Well, that's because we're getting a lot more tariff money right now. We're getting a lot more taxes from China. We're getting more money from China so we can increase our GDP. That's why we're doing that. It seems to be working, okay? Not only that, but, obviously some political advantages to it, too, is that, if we can create a better trade agreement that would benefit both countries, then that would be the idea behind it. I kind of think that's why President Trump started raising these things. He's kind of trying to twist our arm saying, hey, let's discuss this and make a better trade agreement between the two of us. So something that's been going on for a while. But to do that, he's been increasing all of the taxes on imports, okay, so we can control that. There's a protective one, raise the retail price of imports. So domestic goods, just like I said, domestic U.S. Can competitively compete. Okay, so the prices elevates the price to a competition level, and then the U.S. products can compete. And then again, to raise money, revenue. We can bring money into the country, increases our GDP. A second way to do it, so first way is tariffs. A second way to do it is import quota. So on top of any product that's coming in, I want to keep using China because that's just a great example, okay? But anytime a product comes in from China, we add a tax to it, right? So we can increase the price so that it's competitive within the United States. But then we might say too, for a given year, for let's say 2019 or this year 2020, right? We would say once you hit a certain quota of imported goods on that one good, you're not allowed to send any more in. Okay, so once that import quota has hit from a foreign country, that means the U.S. can continue to sell their products. So again, we're benefiting U.S. businesses to stay in business, so we can help the economy out. So 2 is import quota, and 3, the third way, is an embargo. We just won't do business with you. Okay, we're just gonna complete ban of imports or exports of a certain product and stopping all trade within a particular country. Right now, I would say political disagreements. We have an embargo against Cuba. I would say, though, we're starting to lift those trade barriers right now with Cuba. I think they're starting to lift that embargo since Castro has passed away because there's new leadership in there. They're looking at doing different things. They actually want to have trade because they realize it's good for Cuba's economy. So there's a lot of negotiations right now to try to lift those embargoes and start doing some stuff with Cuba. So that's a good thing, too. I really want you to understand these things. So what are the 3? The 3 ways are tariffs or taxes on imports, quotas, the limited amount of product that can come into a country in a given amount of time, and embargo, meaning we just don't do trade with you at all. Okay? Another way is outsourcing. We talked about, I've actually mentioned this before, right? Insourcing, where you can have a foreign direct investment inside the country, or you can outsource it, right? I can go purchase goods and services from sources from other firms. So again, I mentioned outsourcing. I don't do my taxes anymore for the business. I outsource it to a CPA to do it for me, right? Because I don't want to do it. If I don't want to manufacture something here, I may outsource it to another country, say China or something like that, to reduce my cost. I may want to, if I'm making pens and I need labels, I don't want to make the label, I'll outsource it and have them make the label for me. There's different ways of outsourcing, okay? U.S. firms outsource payroll functions. That's a great example. I talked about the CPA and accounting stuff. Accounting, manufacturing for many years. With the growth of global markets, it's definitely something that's going to be in the future, whereas a lot of outsourcing with other countries, because again, with that free trade agreements and we start having more policies in place that allow to have more trade amongst countries, outsourcing is going to be big. And then we get into the future of global trade. We start looking at China as the largest global consumer of steel, copper, cement, things like that. Because remember, if you recall, their GDP is going up. They want that same cost of living that we have. They want that good life that we have too, okay? So they're really working on that. And if you remember, and they're second only to the U.S. in oil consumption, right? I kind of mentioned it when we talked about absolute and comparative advantages. Remember I talked about the absolute, they have the best product and everyone buys from them and stuff like that. And comparative, where you can start doing it more efficiently yourself. You don't have to rely on other people. I told you the U.S. is becoming a little bit more comparative because we can create our own oils now. We're generating our own barrels of oil. So, that's because we have a large consumption of it, right? Because the more oil we have, it allows us to use other resources and do buildings and stuff like that. So we want to keep our cost of living high. Multinational are investing heavily in China right now. That's still true. I'll be curious how that goes after what's going on in today's world. That may change. India has a huge growth. If you remember the chart I showed you, 2008, they weren't on the map. And in 2018, everyone's investing there. So that supports that. And again, Russia is a large oil producing country with many multinational interests in developing there as well. Again, go back to that chart I showed you. Russia wasn't even on there in 2008, and now they're just jamming. Everybody's starting to put foreign direct investment into China or into Russia and into India. And here comes Trump, right? He's all over this stuff. He loves the global trade stuff. He is working this thing as best as he can. So get ready. He's been here. I think it's gonna keep going. And that is it. Now we've gone through VLR-3 and we've gone through the global stuff. And I will see you next time on VLL4. So I'll see you there.